Today's lesson in continuing our Life of Christ study is beginning that section about the appearances, post-resurrection. It's a 40-day period between, depending on how you look at it, I guess, between the death and ascension, or resurrection and the ascension. So the reason we know it's 40 days exactly, or maybe not exactly, but about, although Luke in other places wasn't afraid to say about, and he didn't say it in this place. It's in Acts chapter 1, verse 3, where we learn this. Acts chapter 1 and verse 3, Luke, who wrote the book of Acts, to the same person that he wrote the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke, the same immediate recipient. He says, "In the first book, O Theophilus, I have dealt with all that Jesus began to do and teach, until the day when he was taken up, after he had given commands through the Holy Spirit to the apostles whom he had chosen." Verse 3 says, "He presented himself alive to them after his suffering by many proofs, appearing to them during 40 days, and speaking about the kingdom of God." So after he was killed, he presented himself alive to them, says the doctor, Luke, by period, or appearing to them during 40 days. So we don't know the order of these appearances. We just know that it spanned a period of 40 days. So a little over a month, Jesus appeared to various people. 10 different appearances, roughly, that we see recorded in the Scriptures, at least in the New Testament. We know that there are 50 days between Passover and Pentecost. That's why it's called Pentecost, is because of the 50. I don't have the exact meaning of the word, but it's grounded in that at least. And now we know that 40 days. There were 40 days between the resurrection or death and the ascension of Jesus, which leaves us with 10 days roughly from Jesus' ascension and to Pentecost in Acts 2 was 10 days, or around 10 days, because the 50 days and then the 40 days leaves 10 days. So that's, if you ever hear anybody say that there were 10 days between Jesus' ascension and Pentecost, that's where that comes from, because you take the 40 out of the 50 days and it leaves 10. So that's the period we're dealing with here, not the 10 days, but the 40 days that Luke mentioned in Acts chapter 1. This 40 days. Why did Jesus spend 40 days doing that? I don't know. Sorry. I don't know. But he did. The reason that he was appearing to people was because he had some more to teach them, to say. He had more to say. There was still a few things that he needed to let them know. Why he did it over 40 days is what is unclear, as opposed to 30 days, or I doubt it took, I don't know how much space was between each one, but for whatever reason, that is how long he spent appearing to them, until the last appearance, when he immediately, that's the one where he immediately went up, that Luke records in Acts chapter 1, or mentions in Acts chapter 1. Mm-hmm.
Well, obviously, the apostles had the same question, because a little bit farther he goes, he said to them, "It is not for you to know times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority." In other words, it's like, don't worry about it. That's not part of your job.
Yeah. Is now the time when you're going to, when the kingdom's going to be restored to Israel? See, they still didn't get it. And that was after the 40 days. That was on day 40, presumably, because that's right before that's when Jesus ascended into heaven, back to sit down at the right hand of the Father. And Jesus says, he doesn't even deal with the question. He just, don't worry about that. Worry about what I told you. You just do that. Times and seasons, on the divine calendar, in general. Not man's thing. Man wouldn't be good at dealing with that. So they would get it 10 days later whenever the Holy Spirit came over them. But for now, we're looking at John 20, and we'll also be looking at Mark 16 and Luke 24 a little bit, and Matthew 28. At the first two appearances of Jesus after his resurrection. Now, again, back to man trying to handle divine things, we might think that it would have been the best thing for Jesus to do, to go around appearing to every single person that he could possibly appear before. If you want people to believe that you're alive again, you want the maximum amount of exposure. Jesus could walk around in Jerusalem and we might think that would have been so much better than appearing to people that already believed he was alive. But then again, who am I to say? I'm not God, and there's no way that I've ever come up with anything better than God has. So that obviously it wouldn't have been better. For one thing, just as Jesus had already said in one of his parabolic moments, even if somebody rises from the dead, they're not going to believe. So that was proven to be true, and so that wouldn't have been an exception, I'm sure, if Jesus had just walked around in Jerusalem and let everybody, he could have gone to Pilate's house and said, "Hey, remember me?" But nope. He chose to do it this way, and we simply have to believe that it was the best way, because God always does things the best way. I meant to mention the other night also that if this had been made up, the women would not have been the first ones to learn about this. Make of it what you will, but no Jew would have had that happen in a story he made up. It's just not the way it would have been done. That never in a million years would a Jewish man at that time, or maybe even today, I don't know, would have put that into the story that women were the first ones. And that's going to be repeated again in this lesson, that a woman, Mary Magdalene, seems to have been, even though, like I said, we don't know the exact order and even how much space in between, which one was actually first, how does it correlate to the other things we've already seen. But this one seems to have been the first, and this lesson covers the first two appearances of Jesus after his resurrection. Beginning in John chapter 20, we'll look at John's account first. John 20, verses 11 through 18. They've already found the empty tomb. They've already told Peter and John. Peter and John didn't believe them. They race to the tomb. They see the empty tomb. They scratch their heads. And they go home. Although John says that he believed when he saw the things that he saw in there. But they still didn't quite understand. So now, we pick up in verse 11, John chapter 20. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they've laid him." Remember, that's exactly what she said earlier. They said to Peter. She said to Peter. Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she didn't know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and to your Father, to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, I have seen the Lord, and that he said these things to her. Okay. So, like I said, it's difficult to put it with the other. We already had a little bit of difficulty in Mary being at the tomb alone, but then she went and told Peter, but then she was also there with some other women. So obviously Mary's been to the tomb multiple times, and it's not clear where this one fits in, but we have to assume that this would have happened after those, because there's no way that she would have gone to Peter and John and mentioned about the tomb being empty and seeing the angels, but somehow just slipped her mind that she saw Jesus. That would not have happened, clearly. That would have been the principal thing. Jesus was here, and I know he was here. He talked to me, and I talked to him. If this had already happened, but obviously it didn't happen at that time. But sometime after that, this event happened. So Mary's still lingering around the tomb. And the same two angels, or two more angels, speak to her again. But this time, she turns around and she sees a man standing there. She didn't know she didn't see him before. And she assumes, notice very carefully, she does not immediately assume it's Jesus. Because somebody who's in a moment of hysteria of some kind, or the emotions are getting away with getting them carried away, may see somebody and immediately think it's somebody that they're thinking about. But she looks at this man and thinks that it's the gardener. Yeah, maybe, yeah. Or maybe he wasn't standing, he may not have been, just like maybe a gardener, if it really was the gardener, isn't going to be in the same spot the whole time, it may have been somewhere else. But how many times have you seen in a movie or a show or something where somebody's mourning over somebody, or somebody's thinking about somebody that's lost or something, and they look and they see somebody and they think, oh, it's, like whatever their name is, let's say their name is David, David? But then the camera shows it is some total stranger, not the person. They thought it was them for a second. They saw, their mind played tricks on them. This is like the exact opposite of that, where Mary sees this man, and she thinks it's somebody else, not the man she's thinking about. So it's the total opposite of, the way that it would normally, or that it's depicted in times of where your mind plays tricks on you. She did not expect to see Jesus standing there. Just like she did expect to see Jesus' dead body in the tomb where it belongs, and it wasn't there. She did not expect to see Jesus standing there, which he was. And she didn't know it was him even after she spoke to him. Was she talking to his back? Or, what? We don't know. There's questions we don't have the answers to. But for whatever reason, probably because she didn't expect, sometimes, people say people see what they expect to see, and they don't see what they don't expect to see. So, people could hide in the middle of a crowd or disguise themselves very mildly, because people, if they're not expecting to see you there, they probably won't notice you there because they're not expecting to see you there. Well, for whatever reason, she didn't recognize Jesus until he said her name. Yep.
We've seen those clips where they've taken, like a man has been in the service and he's supposed to be overseas or whatever.
I was just thinking about that, yeah.
Pop up
at an event, a big event or something, and
it always takes them a while before they realize
they don't even.
It's really.
It might be their husband or wife, and they're like, and then all of a sudden, because they're not supposed to be there,
Exactly.
You can't be you because you're over there, but it is them, and then it's like hits them all of a sudden. Well, I just point this out because anybody that might try to pass this off, and some of the people that she told may have even passed it off, like, Mary, you need to go go lie down or something. Go to bed. You're exhausted. You're hysterical. Go get some rest. And they may have thought that with the best intentions and meant it not in offensive or anything, but just sincerely, genuinely. But she did not immediately assume it was Jesus and take off running. I saw Jesus. She thought it was somebody else. And then he said, Mary. Now, why did that make it click in her mind? It couldn't have been his voice because he already spoke to her. Now, some people have taken this too far to the extent that they must have had a special relationship, a romantic relationship even, and so on and so forth, for this to make any sense. Well, that's not necessarily the case at all. But for whatever reason, something about the way he said her name, that's when her recognition came to her, and she realized it was him. And she must have, approached him more closely. And what he says to her is kind of interesting. He says, "Don't cling to me. For I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Now, what is the point of him saying, "Don't cling to me because I haven't yet ascended to my Father"? Do you think?
Because it has to be named here or something? Yeah, the whole story's not finished until he ascends.
Yeah.
He has to return to the Father in order to complete everything.
I think he's just saying, I'm not going to stay around long, so don't claim.
Yeah.
In other words, I'm going to be here a short time. I've not come back to stay here.
Yeah. Or it could be the other way around, that I'm not leaving yet. I mean, that's kind of what he said. I haven't yet ascended to my Father. So whatever he intended in the immediate sense, for her to understand, we, looking back, we understand that this being the first, if Luke said he appeared for 40 days, then this must have been 40 days before he ascended to heaven, or somewhere around there, unless Luke didn't mean from the first appearance. But at any rate, he wasn't done yet. He still had some things to do. But what he needed her to do was something that it required her to go. Not stay here where he is. Go. Look what he says. Who does he say that she has to go to? His brothers. Not your brothers. Go to my brothers. We haven't really seen Jesus use that kind of language, have we, before? My brothers. We see the Hebrews writer talk about that later, but Jesus, if ever, very rarely uses that kind of language. And then he presents God the Father as her Father, their Father, his Father, and their God and his God. So Jesus calls the Father, Father often, but he's your Father too. He's my Father, but he's also your Father, which he had already said before, but he stresses it here. My Father and your Father. I am soon going to be ascending to my Father. And the implication is, I won't be coming back. But not yet. Not yet. For now, go and tell them what I've told you to tell. So then we flip over to Mark's account for the reaction. We read in John there that she went and did what he said. But in Mark's account, verses 9 through 11, Mark 16, 9 through 11. Now when he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went and told those who had been with him, as they mourned and wept. But when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they wouldn't believe it. So, very abbreviated, obviously. And he emphasizes that this was he first appeared to her. Why did he first appear to her? Don't know. Frankly, don't really care. But he did. I care that he did. I just don't care why he did. He had his reasons, and that's that. But when she told the others, they didn't believe her. Just like with the empty tomb. Peter and John thought she was talking nonsense. Now, they think the same thing. You didn't see Jesus. Now, I mentioned Wednesday night how sometimes something that has happened, something that happens can sometimes totally kick out of our minds something that we know or that we should know. If Jesus' tomb was empty, and there's no way that his tomb could be empty because somebody came and stole the body, why would it be so far-fetched that Mary may have seen him? But they weren't thinking that way at this point, at least. They thought, no, you're, like I said before, you need to go lie down, get some rest. You're not thinking clearly. When really, they were the ones not thinking clearly. Mm-hmm.
In the ESV, it says that this section wasn't included in earlier manuscripts.
Mm-hmm.
So this, I mean, it's just almost a parallel to what happened in Matthew. Do you think how did it get here?
What's that? This?
Yes, this section. How do we know that it belongs here?
We don't. But at the same time, there's nothing in Mark 16, 9 through 20 that's not elsewhere. So there's nothing, I mean, I don't notice anything in Mark 9 or 16, 9 through 11 that we didn't just read in John 20. That it's just, if anything, there's less. Other than in this text, he points out that Jesus had cast out 7 demons from Mary Magdalene, but I want to say that is alluded to somewhere else that's not here. But
it's interesting that in 12, verse 12, that it said he came in another form.
yeah,
And it's kind of,
I think
I
that
don't know what that means.
that I would take to be parallel with the 2 that were on the road,
Right,
but another form in the sense of he didn't look like himself, because that's why they didn't, presumably would be why they didn't recognize him.
But then a little bit later, with Doubting Thomas, he had the nails or the imprints and the nail in the side.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't understand why it says another form. Because I mean, if he's got a resurrected body, he's got a resurrected body.
Yep. I would file that again under the God knows better than we do. So why did he do that? I don't know. But he had a reason, had to have had a reason. Because he didn't always.
And the back of my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know, these people know what they're talking about.
So you take that as maybe this shouldn't be there?
In other words, yeah, I'm not trusting
Well,
as much as I do.
then that gives you and anti-baptism people plenty to agree about then, because they're the only ones that I know of that don't want Mark 16, 9 through 20
It's
in the...
not don't want, I'm just not.
Well, I know, not you not wanting it, but... Well, another form certainly agrees with the idea that the 2 on the road to Emmaus did not recognize him. So the question of why he would have done that is unanswerable. But as far as the text itself, I don't see any issue there, because in that account, the 2 of them that were walking into the country or whatever, they didn't recognize Jesus, and for some reason they didn't recognize him, and that would explain why they didn't recognize him. It doesn't explain why he was in another form. But, yeah.
On transfiguration, and there it says the phrasing is, where is the phrasing? He appeared to them, and his face was
his face was altered, and there's a,
The appearance of his face was altered, and his clothing became dazzling white. So that's the footnote that it goes to.
Will he look like himself? Will they just recaptured him and try to re-crucify him again? If he looked like, you know what I mean? If he's walking around again, maybe they thought they didn't get it done, and then they
yeah,
captured him again.
who knows? There's no way of saying. Again, he had to have a reason. Now, the reason that he appeared in his usual, normal, I guess we would call it, appearance the other times is because that was the point, that was the purpose, and that's what Thomas's doubting was. He wasn't doubting that Jesus was alive. He was doubting that Jesus was a person. And that's what Jesus was proving to him with his body.
The only reason I'm questioning, I thought it was you that taught that we will come back in a body similar to what we are in.
That's not what I taught. That's what Paul taught. But
See?
yeah,
Similar but changed.
Similar, but,
just like Jesus' body. But anyway, yeah.
okay. That's why I question it. It's like, it doesn't
The dead
make
will
perfect
be
sense.
raised, yeah. And Jesus taught it also, the dead will be raised. But from the grave. But yes, I know you have your issues with that concept, but you can take that up with Paul.
Trying to sort it
Whenever you correct him on so many other things, you can correct him on that one too. Only kidding, sort of. So, Mary, see, she's got us talking about one of the other appearances, and we're supposed to be talking about the first two appearances, which is not that one yet. We'll deal with those. We'll deal with that in the other form, if we haven't already. We'll deal with it on those appearances, or those lessons about those appearances. I can't remember which number that one is, but it may be Wednesday, maybe next Sunday, whichever one that Luke 24 appearance is. So the reaction was they didn't believe it. And maybe this is why 40-day period or whatever, however many appearances were necessary, because of that kind of thing. We certainly see several people struggling to believe it, and we can't really blame them too much because it was so confusing. Even when they finally did believe, like it says John already, he believed that Jesus was risen. Not that they took the body away, but that he was alive. That other people might believe in their heart that he is alive, but that doesn't mean that they're going to believe that he's going to appear, and it certainly doesn't mean they're going to believe when they see someone that seems to be him, that they're going to just automatically be like, oh yeah, you're alive. You rose from the dead, so that's you. That doesn't necessarily, that's not an easy, those dots don't necessarily connect automatically. So people struggled, just like you would probably struggle if somebody that you knew was dead showed up at your house and was saying, hey, it's me. It wouldn't, after you awoke from unconsciousness, you would need some explaining. And that's what Jesus is going to do just over time, when it's appropriate. At this point, he didn't offer any explanation. He just said, I need you to go and tell my brothers that and that may be an abbreviated or paraphrased message, and not just that exact thing, that she just went and said, hey, by the way, Jesus is ascending to the Father. And leave it at that. There may have been more to it, but that's just the simplified, maybe simplified version. Okay, so the second appearance, that's pretty much it for that one. The second one, very quickly, is that up to the other women. So the first appearance was to a woman. The second appearance was to the other women. And that goes with what I said at the beginning about if this was a fabricated or invented account, that would not be. You know that Jesus would be appearing to John or Peter or who knows who would have been chosen to be good enough to be the one that Jesus appeared to. But no, it was a lowly, humble woman, and then the other women that were there at the cross a few days earlier, and that were going to the tomb. So Matthew 28, yes, what'd you got? I saw your reaction, so you had something.
It's an after-class thing, because it can't be.
Okay. Matthew 28, 9 and 10 says, "And behold, Jesus met them and said, 'Greetings.'" This is right after the empty tomb, and the angel said, "He's not here, he's risen." And they departed and ran to tell the disciples. "And behold," verse 9, "Jesus met them and said, 'Greetings.' And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, 'Don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me.'" They will see me. So this is similar to with Mary Magdalene, except this actually mentions they went up and took hold of him. But he says, "Don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers another message," or in addition, tell my brothers to go to Galilee. And they'll see me there. Now, he could have just said, "Tell them to go to Galilee," and they'll find out soon enough. But no, that would have been a pretty good incentive to go. They will see me. And then, notice they worshiped him. And at this point, if Jesus was anybody but Jesus, it would have been preceded by him saying, "Get up and don't do that." Just like the angels have done, at least on one or two occasions. "I'm a servant of God like you. Don't worship me." Paul did the same thing. Not Jesus. That shows that either Jesus is a blasphemer or Jesus is worthy of worship, which means Jesus is God, and clearly he's already proven himself to be that. And so worshiping him is certainly an appropriate response. Now, that's the second appearance. There's no other details there other than what we might put together from the other appearance. Now the scene changes to the enemies. It says, "While they were going," verse 11, "behold, some of the guard." What guard do you think that is? Yeah, some of the group of men that were going to be, alternating shifts to watch the tomb, that obviously failed to do their job because, let's face it, they had no chance, because it wasn't a normal situation. Nobody was going to be guarding that tomb successfully. I guess they guarded it successfully, but they can't guard it from angels or God himself. So, while they were going, behold, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. Interesting. "And when they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers and said, 'Tell people, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble.' So they took the money and did as they were directed. And this story has been spread among the Jews to this day." And the irony is, that statement is still true to this day. But notice this. The soldiers went and told the chief priests what actually happened. And we know that the guards that were immediately at the tomb saw the angels, the earthquake and the angels, and that's when they became like dead men. They didn't become dead men, they became like dead men. Now they're awake again, or however it worked. And they went and told the chief priests what happened. Now, you might think the chief priests then would be shaken to their very core and realize, what have we done? This is not good. Well, they did think that much, but not for the right reason. What they did was they got together and took counsel. And we all know that great things happen when the chief priests get together and take counsel together. And this is no exception, because now they said, they gave them a sufficient sum of money, however much that was, and said, tell people not what you just told us. Do not tell people what you just told us. They didn't say that, but that's clearly the implication. They said, tell people, here's what actually happened, but tell people that this happened. That's as blatant as a lie and deliberate deception as anything could ever be. You've just told us what you saw actually happen. You lock that up tight in your own mind and heart or whatever. As long as it doesn't come out of your mouth, I don't care where you put it. And tell people this happened. And the thing that they told him to happen is the dumbest thing that anybody could ever think of. His disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. I kind of dealt with this Wednesday night. How in the world do you know what somebody did when you were asleep? And especially, how do you know who did it? So you might say, well, we were asleep, which, by the way, is already telling on yourself. Secondly, you might wake up and see that the tomb has been opened and is empty, but you don't know who took it, who did it, because you were asleep. But this is the story that they paid them to tell, and they actually did it. They actually told this story. And I guess if anybody asked the obvious question, like, wait a minute, you were asleep? Then how'd you know that this happened? I would love to have seen that part, Let me go talk to the chief priest for a second. What do we say when people ask how we know what happened? And we probably know what they would have done. Be like, get out of here. We paid you already.
But we see that every day now, at least I have. You will hear and see something factually right in front of you. And then the experts tell you that you really didn't see that. You should have heard this and this and this. And so you sit there, well, maybe I'm crazy, I didn't see it or whatever. And you take the expert's advice, maybe I did fall asleep. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When they took the counsel, it means that they distrusted what they saw and just believed the experts.
Yeah, whenever people are violently intolerant of something that you think or believe or even see, they are willing to gang up against you, and that's what we see happen in universities all the time now. It's not even about, it's just somebody believes something, they can't handle it. So, and they'll tell you something instead, but first they'll make you feel stupid for believing that, even though anything else you want to believe is you're right. And if you try to tell somebody that that's not right, then you are the devil himself, or even worse. But if you believe this thing that we don't approve of, then you're just stupid. So Christians have no hope with the world except to be, you get to choose between being stupid or evil. Those are your two options. Hopefully you'll pick stupid every time if those are your two options. But in this case, they were directly told what, according to the text anyway, actually what happened. They told them all that had taken place, up to the point when they passed out or whatever they did, I guess. That would have been enough to piece together that this is not normal activity. When you see two men that are obviously angels, and when they saw them come down and roll that stone away and whatever else they did, and then you pass out, and then you wake up, and then I don't know, were they still there? We don't know the rest of that story. But the fact that these men got together these were not dumb men. They were smart enough to be where they were, but they were also selfish and self-involved enough and corrupt enough to want to actively cover up anything that incriminates themselves, and yet so much that they were willing to say, yeah, we know that you said this happened. We believe you. you know. Just don't tell anybody else. Tell them this. And they did. And then they also said, don't worry. If it even comes into the governor's ears, which it may not, but if it does, we got your back. You don't worry. Well, we have you covered. Now, whether or not they were actually going to honor that, we don't know. I wouldn't trust these men. I would not trust somebody that I just told what I saw happen and they told me to make up a lie to cover it up. Why would I trust anything they say they're going to do? But apparently they did, and by the time Matthew wrote his gospel account, that story was still being spread among the Jews to that very day. So, just as much as those men, chief priests, should have believed what these guards told them they saw, we have every reason to believe what these men are telling us that these people saw and that they've recorded. It's not that crazy to the idea of believing something that's written in a book is not, the idea that that's crazy is, that's what's crazy. Because most of the people, or all of the people that would say believing something that the Bible says is ridiculous, they would believe almost anything else that any other book says. They found a book that said people used to live on Mars 1 million years ago, they'd believe it. Just like that. And they'd tell you and your kids that it was true. They tell them stuff like that anyway, even though nobody's ever seen any such thing. And that's why they're out there looking for water, ice, and everything else, is because they already believe that's true and they tell everybody it's true, and they're just, before they've even found the proof. But if there is logical, reasonable, a reasonable explanation or a reason to believe the reliable testimony, then why doubt it? And that's what the Bible presents. Again, if it was fabricated, it wouldn't read like this. This is not how it would be recorded. This is not how it would have played out. It doesn't stand to human reason that it was hysteria or anything. This is just reliable, level-headed witnesses giving their accounts, and men wrote it down, and obviously the direction of the Holy Spirit is all over it anyway.
And they were willing to die for it.
They're willing to die for it, and they did, at least as far as tradition is concerned, and we know some of them did. People are not willing to die for a lie, especially somebody else's lie. So I might be willing to die for my lie, because if I'm so self-obsessed that I'm willing to take my own lie to my grave, I'm not going to be willing to take your lie to my grave, a lie that you made up, that I don't even have any reason to believe. Nobody does that. But if this is a lie, then these people did that. And why would so many people be willing to die for somebody else's lie that they made up? Or maybe it's true. Wow, what a shocker. What a crazy idea. So the point is, if somebody thinks it's crazy to believe that it's true, it's even more crazy to believe that it's a lie. Far more. Just like if somebody wants to say it takes a lot of faith to believe in divine creation, it takes a lot more faith to believe in organic evolution. Way more faith. And more faith in a lot of things. And many of those things don't even exist. But you got a lot of faith in the earth and the solar system and the universe itself to believe that. Sorry, yes. Thank you, Jay. That stone that was on the temple mouth, or the tomb mouth, I've read that it would have taken multiple men to move it. It was made to where it would roll, and yet it apparently was still so heavy that it would take a nice little crew, I guess, to move it, yeah. What's that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, we don't really read them getting back together to, do anything like that. In fact, they didn't go to the tomb until it was already done, The first disciples that showed up at the tomb, Jesus was already gone, so, yep. Just too much there to just think it's coincidence or made up.
The excuse also gave them cover because people who weren't believers saw the resurrected Jesus.
Mhm.
It's like, no, he's over there. Well, yeah, that's because his disciples came and got him. Not only did it leave an empty tomb, but it covered the fact that he was alive and walking.
Yeah, that was one of the things that Paul mentioned where 500 disciples at once, even. So somebody might say, well, yeah, but we can't ask any of them. They're all dead.
Did
So,
Josephus see him?
no, Josephus barely mentioned Jesus, which some people use as proof that, Jesus was not even real or something like that. Josephus was born just a few years after Jesus died. So the fact that he barely mentioned him shows that he didn't exist or that he wasn't what he said he was. But the thing is, some of those same people also say that the passages in Josephus that mention Jesus weren't even written by Josephus. So it's just, people are going to make up anything they can to try to discredit whatever they don't want to believe. So it's a lot easier to simply be consistent and use the same reasoning you use with other things with the Bible. So if I'm not going to believe what these people said because, well, they're all dead, I can't ask these 500 people, so what does that mean to me? Well, as long as that person that says that won't believe anything else that a dead person says they saw or has written, then okay, that's their prerogative, but they don't do that. They'll believe the stuff they want to believe, and they won't believe the stuff they don't want to believe, and that is a flaw of humanity, I guess. But we don't have to be that way, and the key is we need to believe it, but not just say we believe it, but prove it, just like they did. They believed it, and it led to them being devoted to the point of being willing to die, and some of them did. So are we willing to do that? Are we at least willing to live in obedience